Hi there, welcome along to Willis Resilience TV, and this is day 2 of Expedition News. We've got rolling coverage as teenager Parker Leoto attempts to set a world record trekking across the most inhospitable place on Earth. And I'm happy to say today I'm joined by Colleen McCarthy from the United States, who isn't just a TV presenter, but you work for Willis as well, and you know Parker.
That's right. Hello, Dan. I'm happy to be here. We've been working with Parker for several months leading up to the expedition, so we're thrilled to be tracking him and watching the excitement unfold live.
Are you looking forward to the next couple of weeks here in the studio?
Yes, absolutely.
A little warmer here, thankfully, than it is in the Antarctic. Well, coming up on today's show, we'll be speaking to Expedition Doctor Ian Davis. He's an expert in polar medicine and has been to both the North and South Poles and can tell us what it takes to endure and survive the extreme cold of the Antarctic.
And later in our climate change debate, we'll be discussing the pros and cons of nuclear power. After the disasters in Chernobyl and Fukushima, many are asking if nuclear power is worth the risk.
And, of course, we'll be bringing you the latest from the team in the Antarctic. They're currently deep into the science leg of the expedition and trying to make up time after an initial delay.
A lot of driving and a bit of science, I guess. I'm not even sure exactly how long we've been driving for. It feels like quite a long time. We're a little bit closer to the South Pole, but still a long way to go.
Well, this is nice. Colleen.
Hello.
We're not too close, are we?
Not yet.
It's nice to have some company after being on my own as far as the presentation is concerned on day 1. So, working for Willis, you spend time over here. What was it like coming into the foyer and seeing this studio in the corner?
Well, I think it was very exciting, especially for the thousands of Willis associates who come into the building, and they came in yesterday and they saw the large screen TVs and they heard the audio and they saw the live satellite feed from Antarctic, and it's just genuine enthusiasm, and I think there's a lot of pride in Willis being part of this historic expedition.
Yeah, it was really exciting when we actually got hold of Parker via the satellite phone, and hopefully we'll be doing the same thing today. And we'd like to bring you guys watching into this as well. If you've got any kind of message of support or a question for Parker and the team in the Antarctic, then we're going to build up a bank of that information and then feed it to them, and hopefully you'll get a live response during one of the shows over the next couple of weeks. We have a Twitter feed. At Willis South Pole is the Twitter account, and you can hashtag it with anything you want. Willis Resilience, which is obviously the name of the expedition itself, or hashtag I Love Dan. That was one of your favourites, was it not?
I think Parker's going to have a pretty big fan following by the time this is all over.
Yeah, he is a remarkable 19-year-old. Do we know if he's single or not?
I can't confirm or deny.
We'll get that information and pass it on to you. But we'd love to hear from you guys watching this show throughout the next month.
Great. Well, there are a lot of people at Willis and in the wider world who are watching Parker, and it's a lot of responsibility for such a young man.
Yeah, it certainly is. But he seems to have taken one thing on board when it comes to resilience. It's all in the preparation, something he told us about just before he left.
With 10 days to go, it's really a mix of emotions. And it just kind of comes and goes throughout the day because every day we're doing what we need to do. Training, preparation, shipping stuff, last minute preparations, as you would expect. This has to be done throughout the day while I'm balancing all these nerves and emotions. I'm very excited, but every once in a while I just have a few seconds of thinking the scale of what we're about to go do is enormous, and maybe I haven't appreciated that. Maybe what if I haven't done enough training? What if I haven't put on enough weight? What if I get to the start of the expedition and I try to and we're all ready to go and I try to start and pull my sled and it just doesn't move. But what happens if I sprain my ankle on a sidewalk on my way to the airport? It's all just it's hilarious actually, because it's just kind of crazy. When there's something that makes me nervous, the only way I can actually deal with that, when there's something that upsets me or makes me nervous or makes me sad even, or angry, the only way I can deal with these things is to actually be proactive, you know, and to take steps to address it. That makes me feel a lot better. So if there's something like that, if there's something urgent, like if I don't think that I have enough time to get shipments done in time, you know, I have to work on the shipments. If I feel like, if I'm worried about my training, you know, and it's just a mental thing, you know, because nothing has changed. I just, for some reason, I'm worried. It will put me in a better position to do other things I need to do if I go and do a very good training session and remind myself that I've been preparing for 2 years. But right now, you know, 10 days before the expedition, I have to organize freight shipping out of a dorm room for all the supplies for the expedition. That's a nightmare. All this stuff has to be balanced against the fact that there's a certain number of hours in the day. I have to sleep a certain number of hours each day because I need to be rested for this expedition, so I revolve everything around sleep. I say I need to get 8 hours of sleep. I need to get everything else done in the remaining 16 hours. It just comes down to being organized and making sure that everything is just at least on a list and ready to be dealt with. Doing all of those things is what gets me to the point where I can feel good about the expedition. So I don't procrastinate. I don't leave things to the last minute if I can possibly avoid it. But there's just a hell of a lot that needs to be done.
God, it must be so difficult to stay fit and healthy over there.
And motivated.
And motivated. I struggle to stay fit and healthy over here. I snagged a nail this morning, Colleen.
And you almost got run over by a bicycle.
Almost got run over by a bicycle.
Well,
The scourge of London town at the moment. Well, that's a debate we haven't had yet.
Well, thank goodness you're okay. Just in case you need a checkup, we are joined now in the studio by expedition doctor, Dr. Ian Davies. Welcome, good morning. Thanks for being here.
No problem.
You've been to the Antarctic on several expeditions. Tell us, what does it take to prepare for such a trip?
I've been to the South Pole twice, and it's a mixture of mental preparation and physical preparation. Parker may lose up to a quarter of his body weight when he's out there. So beforehand he has to pack on fat, but muscle, because the first part of your body that suffers out here is the fat component. You burn all the fat off in the first few days and weeks, and then all that's left for your body to burn is muscle. And Parker's body will be eating him alive towards the end.
And let's not beat around the bush. This is a matter of life and death in conditions like that.
Well, Antarctica is a bit like a horizontal death zone. It's trying to kill you every second that you're out there. It's a bit like a war without bullets, some people describe it. Us humans are just not designed to be in Antarctica. So it's a very difficult place to survive, really.
So how do you approach that? How do you begin to train your body to experience such extreme conditions?
Well, I think there's the physicality of being out there, which Parker, he's a young man, he's got that on his side. So he's strong, he's fit, cardiovascularly he's very fit. But there's the mental aspect to this as well. And the mental preparation, I think, is at least half of your prep time, really. He's a young man, he's got a lot to prove, really. Antarctica is flat. There's nothing to see, there's nothing to do apart from trudge all day long. And all your little worries in your head start to...
Yeah, well, I was going to say, I mean, given the fact that he's only 19, okay, in some respects, that's going to help, especially when it comes to the physical aspects and the demands of this. But at such a young age, to have the mental fortitude to deal with that kind of expedition is quite remarkable.
It is incredible, but at the moment it's untested. Parker has never done this before. He's done the North Pole several times, which is different. The North Pole has lots to look at. There's polar bears to be careful of. There's big boulder ice to keep you interested all day long. Antarctica is like the world's biggest, flattest billiard board. It is just flat for 2,000 kilometres. So Parker all day long will be thinking, will I make it? Is everything going to be okay? Is my teammate fine? He'll have huge highs and huge lows. He'll have good days and bad days.
And as a doctor, what do you recommend? Is he listening to his body? Is he taking metrics and tests, or?
This is all about personal admin. It is about Parker looking after himself. The minute he drops his guard, even for a few minutes, something will go wrong. Something as simple as sunburn turns into blisters, turns into an ulcer, turns into an infection, and suddenly you're being airlifted out of Antarctica. So he has to be on top of his game 24/7, which is the hardest thing for Parker.
We can see that you've brought some equipment in with you, and hopefully later on in this show we'll get a chance to see a little bit more. But let's get to this, which you held up before we came on air and said, this is the most important piece of equipment that anyone can have in those kind of conditions. You're going to have to explain more, because that looks like a really poor Christmas T-shirt.
Yeah, this is not a fancy dress outfit. This is Marks and Spencer's special thermal underwear that I've adapted with these funny pockets on the front. Now, it may look customized. This may look ridiculous, but it's one of the most important things you wear, because in these pockets live your satellite telephone batteries. Your satellite telephone is essential. It's your lifeline. If something goes wrong and you pick up your satellite telephone and the batteries are dead, you're going to die. You've got no way of communicating. So all your important batteries go in your pockets as soon as you get to Antarctica, and you wear this 24/7, never take it off, so you know if you need your batteries, they're going to be warm.
Okay.
You got thermal undies that would do the,
This
do
will
the
fit.
trick
It's
over
perfect
there?
for you.
I'm a skier,
Not
so I'm
me.
used to wearing thermal long johns, as we call
Sure,
them,
yeah.
or thermal underwear. But I hadn't seen the customized version yet, so.
And it's really important not to get too warm.
What?
Yeah, if you
It's like -30 to -50 there.
correct, but if you sweat, you die. There's a saying in Antarctica. If
You
you
just scared me now, because I'm actually sweating at the moment.
Well, if you sweat, your clothes fill with moisture, and then they start freezing and they lose their thermal properties.
Yeah.
So all the way through this expedition, they will dare not to sweat, and you'll see them taking jackets off, putting jackets on.
It's a constant game of layering
Absolutely.
and regulating the body temperature.
And looking after yourself as well. The minute you stop looking after yourself, it all starts to go wrong, which is what Parker will have to look out for.
What do you think is the most critical piece of gear?
Your brain.
Oh, I like that.
That's good.
That's deep as well.
It is.
Yeah.
Because it's the only thing that, will see you through this.
Yeah.
You have to be constantly looking out for stuff. Parker will have to look after Doug. Doug will have to look after Parker. It's a very interesting scenario. The mental part of this will be the hardest.
It's all fascinating stuff. Hopefully we will see you a little bit later on, and as I said, maybe have a look at some more equipment. For now, Ian, thank you very much.
No problem.
Indeed.
Thank you.
It's time to take a look at how the team are actually getting on in Antarctica. We know they've travelled over 600 miles already so far, and they've been collecting a number of snow samples during the science leg of the expedition. They had a delay in Chile. They couldn't make the journey initially by plane over to Antarctica, but when they did make it, they've been making fantastic progress. And I don't know if we have a map of where they are. We don't. Maybe we'll get to that a little bit later on.
For right now, what we're going to do is we're going to check in with Patty, our driver of the Resilience Expedition truck. He's been putting together, our cameraman, he's been putting together a nice package of images.
He's been working
from
hard.
the ice.
Yeah. So this is from Paddy, and I believe it had something to do with the delay they had in Chile.
So Nathan, what's been going on since we arrived?
A lot of driving and a bit of science, I guess. I'm not even sure exactly how long we've been driving for. It feels like quite a long time. We've just been getting bits and pieces of sleep in the truck, on the road. AO must be absolutely exhausted, sort of driving non-stop. I think we did about 60k or so, and then pitched the tent. AO got some sleep. We all got a good night's rest, and then woke up early in the morning. Did the first sample. Parker did his first sample, and then that took us quite a while actually, because we were using the core for the first time, the ice core sampler, which is quite a tricky drill. It was pretty high winds with low visibility, so that made it a bit difficult, and it took us a few hours. and then we got going again. And now here we are, I guess. I'm not even sure exactly where we are, to be honest, but we're a little bit closer to the South Pole, but still a long way to go.
Obviously, the expedition on the ice in Antarctica. Let's cross live, shall we? And just heard that the satellite has dropped out. We had them there, waiting to talk to us, and hopefully taking those wonderful live pictures once again. Let's show you what the frozen picture is like right now. So those are the guys, Parker, alongside Doug, who is a polar expert himself, been on many, many expeditions, and a really experienced guide. And so that was them literally with Parker holding the phone to his ear, waiting to speak to us.
Yep, and you saw some of the terrain in the footage of the truck. And so you think that Antarctica is completely flat, but then you see that terrain and all the nuances and the complexity of it.
Well, Ian Davis, they've been on these expeditions yourself to aid on the medical front, as well as just to be over there to enjoy the terrain. But you were saying the worst day you've had on an expedition in those kind of conditions, you covered a ridiculously short amount of...
We were driving for 24 hours straight at 1 kilometre an hour.
Right.
So we managed to do 24 kilometres in 24 hours,
wow,
which is mind-numbing. Those big bumps you saw are called sastrugi, and they're formed by the wind. The wind comes from the south, and they all point south. So if you're stuck with your navigation, you can look at the patterns of the sastrugi, and if you really needed to, follow them. Exactly, yeah. But some of them are this tall, some of them are that tall.
It's extraordinary pictures, and hopefully we'll get plenty more of those over the coming 3-4 weeks. Hopefully, Parker, you can hear us now. Just checking that's the case. Hi, Parker.
Hello.
Hi. I think we've got you okay. We're still trying to establish the pictures again, but we can hear you fine. It's been pretty slow progress, it seems, for you guys.
It has a bit, hasn't it? It's we had some pretty big sastrugi today, and so far I think we've gone a total of probably 120 kilometers today, which is okay, but we still want to get to the pole by the end of the day, and we've just started getting into some better conditions, but the truck is just, today was just going slowly but surely through some really tough snow.
Yeah, we saw some images of the terrain, Parker. Tell us what the conditions are like today, and how is the team feeling?
Well, as I said, they've been pretty tough. I mean, it's nice days though. It's sunny and clear. It's not too cold, and the snow is pretty tough for the truck, but it's handling it really well. It just means that we're going a bit slower than we have in previous days. But everyone's feeling great, I think, and I think that the team generally is doing well and in high spirits.
Has it affected the experiments that you guys are carrying out? This is the science leg of the expedition, and that's the important bit, isn't it? Just getting the samples.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
I'm just wondering if the conditions there have affected the science experiments.
No, it hasn't, in the sense that the conditions here, the sastrugi that we're facing are basically just a wind affects snow that has come onto the ground just by normal, snowing, basically. And there is a protocol for how you deal with those when it comes to the science. It does mess up things a little bit at the surface because the initial site of where the snow has fallen has been altered by processes after the deposition. But there are ways of dealing with that and finding good spots to sample and making sure that we're doing it right and not just getting junk at the surface. So yeah, it does make it a little bit more challenging, but it's not compromising the integrity of the samples.
Parker, we've got Ian Davis with us in the studio, who is a doctor and has been on expeditions to the South Pole himself. Maybe you've got a question or two for him, Ian. Go ahead.
Good morning, Parker. I've got
Right.
one question for you. What is the colour of your urine today? Is it dark or
I'd
is it?
say probably it's too dark.
It's too dark, and that's important, isn't it?
It is important, and I don't want to answer the question that you were going to answer, I guess, but one thing that I wanted to bring up, I guess, was how challenging it is to actually be drinking enough water, because the truck is bouncing pretty heavily on top of these ridges, and it makes it almost impossible to drink, and when we're going for long periods of time without stopping, it's something you don't always realize. And you know probably better than anyone how important it is to be drinking lots of water at this altitude and these conditions.
It is. I mean, Parker, if your urine is yellow, you need to drink more. It's a simple message. You know that.
Yeah. Well, thank you for reminding me. I do actually need to be reminded, because
We'll have Dr. Ian.
It's very easy.
We'll have Dr. Ian on wee checks on a regular basis for you.
Parker will
Rest
tell you how
assured.
important it is.
No, I'm sure it is. It's probably a good message for most of us. Oh, there you go, Parker. We have the satellite pictures up, and maybe this is a good time to pass. And just as I say that, it goes down again. Oh, darn it! These connections to the South Pole. Why can't they just work smoothly?
Well, it's a long way.
But I'll tell you what, Parker. We saw Doug, who's the more handsome member of the team, I understand, standing next to you. Perhaps you could pass the phone to him so we can ask a question.
Sure. I'll pass you to Doug then.
There you go. We can see the pictures are back with us. So, Parker, give the phone to Doug. Oh.
Okay. Here's Doug.
Doug, are you there, Doug?
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, this is Doug.
How are you, mate?
I'm doing just fine. How are you doing?
Yeah, we're warm. A little bit too warm. You don't want to hear that, though, do you? Is Parker getting on your nerves yet?
What? Repeat that again?
Is Parker getting on your nerves yet?
Actually, I've been up front checking out for crevasses, so I haven't spent a lot of time with him. He's been in the pod in the back with Nathan, so no, not yet. No, he doesn't bother me. We have a good time together.
Well, Doug, we know this partnership goes back a long ways. How important is it to have this kind of team that you two have assembled?
Well, absolutely. You know, I think, and that's, you said it right on the bat. It's a team effort, you know, and our whole team, the whole Willis Resilience team, you guys there, the guys in the truck, AO driving 20 hours straight, nonstop, and then we're resting 10. So it's a complete team effort amongst everybody. And Park and I go back when he was 15, I think it was. So that was his first time. He's grown into more of a man. He was a boy back then, and you know, we're psyched for what's in front of us. And it's been really slow moving, and I wish we were starting today. Is pretty much how I feel. But we got a few more days of travel. Hopefully we can get to the pole today or tomorrow, and then a few days down to get to the Leverett.
Well, I'll tell you what, we'll let you get back at it. It's great to speak to you, and although the pictures have been intermittent our end, it's lovely to see that you guys are doing well on the ice, and give our best to the rest of the team, and tell them we'll catch up with them as well over the coming weeks. We'll speak to you tomorrow, hopefully.
Right on.
Ah, good.
Very exciting.
Doug's quite a character, I understand.
Yes, he is. I think he's going to bring a lot to the project.
Yeah. So there are 5 members, including Parker, and we'll introduce them and keep you up to date with their progress as well. Ian, for now, thank you very much indeed.
Brings back great memories for
well,
me.
I bet it, yeah. It's
wonderful.
Yeah. I kind of want to be out there myself to a certain extent, just to experience it.
Well, now some more footage of that very frustrating time when the guys were stuck in Chile waiting for a weather window so that they could land in the Antarctic.
All right, the fuel flight went out last night around midnight. I think I heard it over my hotel. The Aleutian 76 is a very loud aircraft, so it's distinct and unique, and heard it like last night, so I was kicking myself saying, yeehaw, they got the fuel flight out, at least unless it didn't turn around. So I was anticipating a call this morning at 6 o'clock, and we got the call from Mark from ALE, and we're walking to the AOE office right now, AO and I, to go meet with them, to have a plan to drive the truck to the airport. I don't think the plane will be back until about 10 or 11 today, this morning. And right now, it's about 9:30, and we're just going to go meet, make a plan.
Are you going to let anyone else drive the truck on for you?
On plane or on the glacier?
Either.
I'm going to drive it on the plane, and then we just have to see how much money you got.
All right, the fuel flight went out last night around midnight. I think I heard it.
Okay, let's get to our first debate of the day. We're going to talk about the subject which is at the very heart of Parker and the team's expedition in the South Pole, and that is, of course, climate change. So with us in the studio, we have the Right Honourable Peter Lilly, a Conservative MP of course. We have Gwyn Dyer, who's an international journalist, who's written about the threat to US national security, even that climate change poses, and Jonathan Reynolds, Labour MP, Shadow Minister for Energy and Climate Change. Welcome to you all, gentlemen. Thanks so much for coming in. Let me put this to you, Peter. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is a UN body, produced a report saying essentially that there was, near as damn it, no proof that climate change is not man-made, is not anthropogenic. And therefore, others, activists primarily, have said the debate is over. Climate change is man-made. Is the debate over?
Well, there's never been any dispute by people like me about the basic science. I studied physics at Cambridge. The greenhouse effect exists, double the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, you'll raise the temperature a bit, about 1 degree, may have knock-on effects, increasing or decreasing that amount. But the debate about how much heating there is and what we should do about it remains completely open. The IPCC itself, in its last report, had a section on the economics, and they concluded that they couldn't identify a way of preventing global warming that costs less than allowing it to go ahead. So, you know, whether we should try to prevent it by very expensive transfer from fossil fuels to unreliable renewables or not is open to question. And there's also debate about how certain we can be and whether we should be as certain as the latest IPCC report. Do you want me to go?
Well, yeah, 1 second. I just want to bring Jonathan in then. Does there have to be absolute definitive proof and certainty that man-made carbon emissions are responsible for climate change before meaningful policy is in place, not just in the UK but worldwide?
No, I think first of all, as Peter said, the science of global warming is unequivocal. I think if you look at the IPCC report, the evidence that it's humans that are causing that global warming is also, I think 95% certain is the figure that they use in the report. Now, if something scientifically is listed as being 95% certain of happening, I think that's enough for us to act upon it. And if we look at the costs of trying to avert that 2-degree rise in temperature, which we're also concerned about, we also have to consider the costs of not doing that and what will be the damage to our country and the world if we allow global warming to go ahead on that kind of scale.
Okay. And Gwen, you've written about this topic extensively. Who did you speak to when you were researching your book?
Well, I first stumbled onto it because I'm not, a climate scientist, but I was in Washington, and a friend of mine who's in the intelligence service said, "Did you know that the Pentagon's getting interested in climate change?" So I rang up a couple of people, had a chat with them. Yes, indeed, they not only believe in it, but they think it's going to provide them with plenty of jobs in the military. And so I came home and asked around London a bit. Turns out the British Armed Forces are making their plans as well. So, we got a live one here. And then I went round and I interviewed climate scientists in about a dozen countries, went to all the major centers, Hadley Center here, the Potsdam Institute in Germany, National Center for Atmospheric Research in the United States, Boulder, Colorado. Must have interviewed about 100 people, mostly scientists, some generals, think tank Overwhelmingly, they were not only convinced of the science, but frightened by it. I mean, it's very interesting. The IPCC doesn't sound frightened, but if you talk to the individual scientists who have contributed to those reports, there's an undercurrent of panic in a lot of the conversations.
Did you find that your sources, your scientists, because they were based in different geographies, was there different views, or was it pretty consistent?
Well, there were a few exceptions. I mean, at that point, the Russians weren't into it. Interestingly, now they are. I think the summer of 2010 and that heat wave and losing a third of their grain crop convinced them, because in the most recent IPCC report, the Russians insisted on putting geoengineering into the end of it, which suggests they do take this very seriously. Now, I've never been able, I know precisely one person in France who writes and publishes about this. But apart from that, yes, there is concern right across the globe.
I mean, I think that's a really interesting point as well. If you look at the nationalities of the range of scientists involved in that IPCC report, whether it's China, India, Australia, European countries, that's a tremendous range of different interests there. And frankly, I just cannot believe that such a wide ranging scientific consensus from so many different people from so many different countries wouldn't be onto something if they couldn't agree on the premise of that report.
But Peter, you shouldn't take it without looking at alternative views. The World Academy of International Scientific Bodies, including the Royal Society, carried out an investigation into how the IPCC produces its report. And this is what they said. They said the summary for policymakers has been criticised for various errors and for emphasising the negative impacts of climate change. The authors of the report reported high confidence in some statements for which there's little evidence. And they went on to make a recommendation. They said quantitative probabilities in a likelihood scale, like the 95% you quoted, should be used to describe the probability of well-defined outcomes only when there's sufficient evidence. And they've been flagrantly ignored by the latest IPCC.
So why is there fear and panic, internationally speaking?
Well, partly, of course, because there's not a science, there's 100 different sciences. There's the science of actual global warming, there's the impact then on crops, the impact on... The people who do one don't know anything about the other, and they can be easily frightened about the others.
And herein lies a problem. On both sides of the argument, you can cherry pick bits of science, bits of research and data to prove whatever you believe in. How do we get beyond that? Because it seems to me, unless we do get beyond that, we're going to be in this period of stasis. Gwyn, what about you?
Well, there's a lot of cherry picking going on, of course, and on both sides of the argument. People always cherry pick, but actually scientists operate under fairly severe discipline in this regard. I mean, the best thing you can do in terms of advancing your career as a scientist is to prove some other scientist wrong. That's how you get advancement in the trade. And so they have to be very careful about the actual scientists aren't allowed to cherry pick. Some of them do anyway, but they get caught, they get sniped.
Without making this too political, I know cherry picking goes all over the place between opposition parties, but are you listening to the same scientists?
Absolutely. I mean, Gwyn's right. On any issue, people tend to cite evidence which they feel backs up their point of view. I think the case against climate change is very much one of an emotional position that people then try and get validation for by picking sources that they want. I think if you approach this objectively, look at the range of scientific opinion, you will see that in the main there is a consensus that this is real and it is a serious problem for us.
I mean, if you wanted to really make your name as a scientist, you would disprove climate change. You would be world famous. You'd be the most famous scientist in the trade.
You would probably be largely ignored. You wouldn't be published any more than these criticisms by the International Academy of Scientific Institutions were even reported.
Well, that sounds conspiratorial to me.
No, it's because of the way the press works. You can have a single story, a narrative, and you stick to it, you elaborate it. If someone comes up with a counter story, it doesn't really fit in, so it gets ignored.
Oh, but it gets into Science or Nature or one of the scientific publications, and they're not actually, a herd of cattle. They actually do insist upon scientific basis for any arguments that are made.
So if there is a view that climate change is real and it's happening, what can be done about it, and what will we see happen in the short and long term?
Well, the short answer is stop burning fossil fuels and anything else that is creating large-scale greenhouse gas emissions, because there is a limit to how much you can do. What terrifies them actually is not 2 degrees of warming, although that would be quite unpleasant for some countries. what terrifies them, and the reason everybody uses that 2 degrees Celsius higher average global temperature number, is that's about where the feedbacks kick in, the knock-on effects, and those begin to contribute warming of their own, and you can't turn them off just by cutting your emissions.
Peter disagrees. Let's just hear what you've got to say on that 2 degree rise, Peter.
I think there's a great deal of evidence for this, and I'm interested. Gwyn thinks that because the Pentagon is worried about something, that is a source of evidence. These are the people that thought there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and the entire world intelligence community had a consensus that was true. They were wrong. Yeah. We had a previous scare about the Millennium Bug, and the entire world sort of consensus was that planes were going to drop out of the sky. Tony Blair said 2 months before the end of the millennium he was prepared to mobilize troops to deal with the disorders which might ensue. It was nonsense. So there can be these collective groupthings that seize people for a while, but actually are exaggerated.
Yeah,
they're not untrue, they're exaggerated.
That's why you then go and interview 100 scientists.
Jonathan.
Gets your attention.
I don't agree with sort of the contention Peter's got there, that this has been an easy argument that the world has been willing to receive very easily. I mean, once you accept that global warming is happening and you have to do something to limit that impact, you know, the decisions and the vested interests that have to be taken on are extremely large. I just don't believe that people have been sitting around waiting to hear an argument on this and waiting to act. It's been a very hard argument.
Isn't it fair to say there used to be a global consensus that smoking wasn't bad for us as well, for instance?
It's bad for us.
Oh, no, have we found a smoker?
There was never any medical opinion on that. That was a commercial aspect of that. You know, again, go to the science. It's always been there on smoking, and it's always been there on climate change.
But the other thing is, if you actually look at industrial interests, it's quite interesting. You know, I mean, obviously the coal industry doesn't believe in climate change because it has no future in that world. The sponsors of this thing, Willis, an insurance company, are very convinced of it because they're paying out about 4 times what they did on damage claims from weather 10, 20 years ago.
Managing extreme events, certainly,
extreme events.
in the interest of not only insurance companies, but any business operation that needs to protect itself from the impact of potential extreme events.
They probably have an interest in making people afraid of climate change because then they'll take out insurance policies. But when you look at damage corrected for the amount of wealth, buildings and so on that lie in the path of hurricanes, you find there's been no increase. And that's well established, and the IPCC was ridiculed for using non-peer-reviewed research which suggested otherwise, coming largely from Munich Re, which has a vested interest in this area.
I might give you an open goal here, if you're lucky, Jonathan, but don't skeptics also have interests if they have connections to the oil industry, for instance?
Yeah, well, I think so. I mean, I think there are, you know, I wouldn't want to doubt anyone's motives who is seriously coming from this from a position of skepticism that's legitimate. But I think, yes, there is a big vested interest against the move to, for instance, cleaner, renewable energy. There's clearly some strong pushbacks from the industrial complex there. And I think, you know, actually one of the things that makes the argument for taking remedial action stronger is if you look at the benefits of addressing something like our carbon emissions from power generation, having domestic renewable supplies has a whole range of advantages that are in addition to reducing our carbon emissions.
It has sullied the debate, sorry, Colin, it has sullied the debate, hasn't it? There's got the mudslinging that does exist on both sides of the argument.
But has the threat started to trigger change? Are we building resilience, not only in this country, but around the world, to protect ourselves against the potential impact?
There's no doubt things are beginning to change. Certainly if you look at power generation across Europe, it's changed a lot. Has it gone as far as it needs to? Absolutely not. It's clearly only the start of that process. But I think, first of all, by having the argument accepted and then remedial action coming from there, we have begun that journey which we have to go on.
And politicians have to be involved every step of the way, whether we like it or not, Peter.
Yes, they do. I mean, going back to your point, one should distinguish between being sceptical and mudslinging. One should certainly look at people's motives. I'm director of an small oil company in Central Asia. Frankly, it's got no interest in my views on this, and they were rather embarrassed when I published my views. And my views, and long before I became a director of that company. I was
embarrassed because they don't agree with them, or embarrassed because
it means people phone them up and say, "Who's this chap, Lily? Is he on your board?" But my views date long before that. I was asked to be chairman of a green company. I said, "I don't think you'd really want me because of my views." So my views are not determined by my interests, but it's
But
perfectly
it can,
reasonable.
it can undermine your
yes, and it's
position.
well, people should ask and should query and look sceptically at what I'm saying, as they should look sceptically at what the Pentagon's saying or what an insurance company is saying. We should approach this with skepticism, not with blind faith. And it's this idea that we can approach it with blind faith because someone says 95% of certainty. What do they mean? What's the justification?
But it's not
Where
someone,
did it
Peter,
come
it's,
from?
It's the scientific community. You know, it's not
Like
blind
Professor
faith
Linson,
to listen to
one of the greatest
scientists.
atmospheric physicists of all time, who doesn't agree, who was a lead author but resigned because he didn't like it.
That's right.
Like the leading expert on hurricanes, who resigned because he didn't like the way his research was being used. Like a leading expert on malaria, who resigned because he didn't like the way his research was being used.
I don't agree that the
Now,
scientific
talk
community is
about
50-50 on this.
I'm
mean,
not
you
suggesting
know,
it's 50-50. Of course it's not.
No, it's
I think
not.
it's overwhelmingly
This is
in favour.
cherry picking. I'm a journalist. When I went out to interview all these people, I was looking for people to argue back. Right? I need a debate here. It's very hard to get a debate. I mean, Linton's one. He happened to be Linton. Yes. Linson. Oh, sorry. Well, there you go. Didn't do my homework, but it's very hard to come up with credible scientists in senior positions in a relevant domain.
I've just given you 3.
That's right. How many are in those domains? About 1,000, 2,000 each. You know, I mean, no, I wouldn't say that. They're among the 100 leading people.
Is this not why the IPCC exists? To collate this information, whether it's information that you agree with or you agree with or anybody else, and offer a view which covers all the information that is coming from all sides of the argument.
And I think that's true, and I go back to the point I made before, which is that if you look at how hard the international community finds it to agree on something, on any issue, you know, whichever part of the UN is affected, the fact that you have such a consensus behind this is remarkable in itself and clearly shows you that there's something real and tangible here.
The topic of climate change and the discussion, one of Parker's missions is to help young people begin the conversation of climate change. In his view, nobody that was young was talking about it, and he wants to change that, and that's part of his mission for this trip. So how do we get the conversation to, how do we engage young people more to begin talking about this?
I think that's admirable. I mean, I would say that from my own experience as a constituency MP, when I go to primary schools in particular, their awareness of the science of this and what's going on is remarkable. There are primary school kids I meet who know more about this than some members of the House of Commons, frankly. So I think it's admirable to see that Parker fulfilling that mission. But I think, you know, actually, generationally, that's perhaps not the dividing line. I think actually perhaps younger people are more aware and more knowledgeable about this.
They are indoctrinated from an early age. I went to a primary school not long ago in my constituency, and one of the little boys says, "When are we all going to burn to death?" And, you know, they've been alarmed to a high degree. It's a substitute religion to some degree, this belief that we're approaching the end of the world and it's all because of our wickedness and greed. There isn't any evidence of that.
You're attacking a straw man. Nobody's saying that.
Well, they're teaching it to children. They're teaching it to children.
I hope they do teach science to children.
No,
in
not
schools.
science. They're teaching alarming, doom-laden projections.
Right, the
Which is
textbooks
not
are
a good
changing
thing.
all the time, in fairness, I think.
Pardon?
The textbooks and what is being taught is changing all the time, you know, as we learn more about these subjects.
I'm sure that doesn't happen in every school.
No. Let me ask you what you think of the expedition, Parker's expedition, and what he's undertaking and the reasons for him doing so.
I don't know enough about it. I suspect when he comes back, he'll be dying for a bit of warmth. He will observe that it's very cold in the Antarctic. What temperature is it at the moment out there?
At minus 30.
Minus 30. So if the temperature rises 10 degrees, what is going to happen? Ice only melts at 0 degrees. If it goes from minus 30 to minus 20, it will not melt. Now, in the long term, a small increase in temperature will erode the edges of ice caps, both in the South and in Greenland.
Right.
But according to the IPCC, melting them will take thousands of years. It is not imminent.
But this is the point I was trying to make, that, you know, Willis are backing a 19-year-old man to go to the South Pole and conduct some groundbreaking scientific experiments to help us all understand this better. You have to commend that, right?
Well, if it's any groundbreaking scientific experiment, I'm sure it's a fascinating thing, and it shows great courage and enterprise on his part, but I don't know what the scientific experiments are.
We'll feature those in other shows. So Peter, I suggest you tune in. Willisresilience.com is the website. Thank you very much. Really interesting debate. Thank you, gents.
Thanks, gentlemen. Lively debate. So whatever side of the argument you're on when it comes to environmental issues, we all need energy and we want to reduce carbon emissions. Many have come to believe that there is a simple and effective answer. We sent our reporter Ash to investigate the pros and cons of nuclear power.
"20 years ago, nuclear was a dirty word. With its heritage and the devastating power of the atomic bomb, and accidents like Chernobyl showing us what can happen when it goes wrong, it's not surprising that we avoided it. But with the UK's coal power stations shutting down to meet our carbon targets, the UK government has just commissioned our first nuclear power station in a generation. So is nuclear the answer to our energy needs? I headed down to meet Professor Bill Lee, Director of the Centre for Nuclear Engineering at Imperial College London, to find out whether nuclear is the answer to our energy needs.
I think nuclear power is the environmental friendly source of energy. I regard myself as an environmentalist. I used to be in Greenpeace. Yes, we should be going for renewables, solar and wind power, but you need your baseload electricity. And so the choice really is not between renewables and nuclear. It's between coal and nuclear, or fossil fuels and nuclear, for that baseload electricity. And because we want a low carbon economy, we want to protect the environment from CO2 emissions, nuclear has to be the option, really.
So there we have it. Nuclear power is the only way we can meet our energy demands, cut our carbon emissions, and it's also a lot safer than it used to be. But aren't we forgetting something?
Yeah, so Fukushima was a bad accident, but largely, it was an old reactor. It held together. So largely, Fukushima demonstrated that again, with the oldest type of reactor, the worst possible scenario, an earthquake and a huge tsunami, it stood up pretty well.
So perhaps the risks of nuclear have been exaggerated. I went to speak to Professor David Elliott, who worked on the UK nuclear energy programme in the 1960s. But is now far more interested in renewable energy.
There is a big difference between external radiation, like background radiation, which everyone lives with, and stuff that you absorb. Once you've absorbed it, it sits in you and continues to radiate bits of your body indefinitely until it causes a cancer. So making comparisons with background radiation is pointless. Yes, I mean, if you ground up chunks of granite and started eating that radioactive granite from Cornwall, yes, you probably would have significant problems, but that's of course what happens with a nuclear power plant. You get all this dust into the food and water and the air that people internalise. The way of looking at nuclear the industry adopts is a little bit limited and obviously makes things sound less frightening. This stuff is dangerous and perhaps if we don't need it, why bother?
Well, that changes things somewhat. But don't we need nuclear to prevent climate change?
Renewable energy, I think, is the solution to climate change, along with energy efficiency. Nuclear power gets in the way of that. It's not compatible with renewables. It's an inflexible technology. You have to run it flat out or not at all.
Well, perhaps nuclear is holding back the development of renewables.
People in the green movement are very keen on renewables. In fact, I'm very keen on renewables. But the problem is that they're only intermittent. So you get electricity when the sun shines and the wind blows, and you need some backup for the situations where the sun's not shining and the wind's not blowing. And if you want low carbon, it's got to be nuclear.
So has it really got to be nuclear? To discuss this, we're joined by a panel of experts this morning. Dr. Paul Dorfman, University College London. You are a nuclear researcher and author of a report on the impacts of the Fukushima disaster. We also have Dan Cobb, Dr. Jonathan Cobb, World Nuclear Association, representative of the nuclear industry. And international journalist Gwen Dyer stays with us this morning. You have written extensively about your support for nuclear due to its low carbon emissions. Welcome, gentlemen. Thanks for joining us. So, Dan, after the events of Fukushima,
Jonathan,
excuse me, Jonathan, after this,
Oh, Paul.
Paul, excuse
my
me.
stars.
That's
Yeah.
okay. That's okay.
It can't get any worse than that.
It'll get better.
After the events of Fukushima, is nuclear energy safe?
Well, nuclear energy has always been intrinsically risky. What you've got is a low probability. It doesn't happen often. The accidents don't happen often, but high impact. So when the accidents happen, they have a very, significant impact on human beings and the environment. So essentially, it's essentially a risky technology.
Do we know how bad Fukushima actually has been with regards to health issues?
Well, I suppose we're getting this quite quickly. The point about health issues is, for example, I was secretary to a UK government science advisory committee on radiation risk, so I ran a Whitehall office on this. And it was about internal radiation. What happens when a piece of radiation gets inside you? Which is a very complex debate about radiation biology or radiation epidemiology. Now, the point about all of this is cancer induction is a slow process. So the problem with the kinds of Fukushima, the most recent meta-analysis of Fukushima tells us that about half of the cesium-137 that Chernobyl emitted fell on the Japanese mainland. Now, we know cesium-137 is a real problem, especially associated with thyroid. Now, with Chernobyl, we saw lots of thyroid in young people.
Okay.
So you wouldn't expect anybody to die now, but you'd be looking for the next 5, 10, 20 years, unfortunately.
Jonathan, what's your response to that? After all, you do represent the nuclear industry. Is it safe? And do you accept the fact that we just don't know yet how bad Fukushima has been?
It is safe. I think in terms of assessing the impact of Fukushima, first of all, you do have to look back and see that during the accident, nobody died as a result of the radiation that was released as a consequence of the accident there now. And in the long term, I think we can expect there to be no impact on people. Because
So you refute what Paul was saying?
Well,
with regards
Paul
to
is talking about the risks, and I'd say that the risks are very, very low, to where we would expect there to be no impact on people's health.
But if people start getting cancer in 10, 15, 25 years from now, you'd have to change your opinion if it was then linked to Fukushima, surely?
If you'd have... No, well, I disagree. First of all, people get cancer anyway, so what you've got to do is show that there are additional cancers as a result of it. And of course, there are monitoring studies going on at the moment to determine that. But because people were evacuated from the area, they have been protected from the worst impacts of the radiation that did fall. They're being kept away from their homes. That's actually a major human impact, and it may be they're being kept away for too long because they're being overprotected. But it's a case that the radiation levels that the public were exposed to, and also actually the people in the plant itself, are of a level when we expect there should be no impact on their health. Okay.
Paul, what's your reaction to this?
Unfortunately, we are beginning to see more than anecdotal evidence of thyroid in young people. There is no question but, unfortunately, we will see considerable health impacts. The situation became so grave that this is a level of radiation that supposedly a nuclear worker is allowed to take. It's 20 millisieverts a year. The situation is so grave that children in Japan, their level that they're now allowed to take is equal to that of a grown-up nuclear worker. And there's no question but a recent UNSCEAR, that's a high-level institutional nuclear organization, a recent UNSCEAR report clearly states that children are at greater risk to man-made radiation than grown-ups.
There was a report in the papers this week that 1,600 people die from the effects of burning coal for power in this country, in the UK, each year. So we're not talking about any perfect technology that doesn't kill anybody. We are talking, you burn fuel oil and, you get blowouts in the Gulf of Mexico and things like that. Coal mines fall on the miners before they get into your lungs and kill you. And so, the question is, what level of risk are we accepting?
Right.
And in those terms, I don't think that the relatively low probability of a disaster and the relatively low, though could exist, I wouldn't agree entirely with Jonathan here, but the relatively low cost in shortened lives, people don't die on the spot, but shortened lives, as Paul was saying, is comparable to the kinds of losses we accept from burning coal or burning oil and so on. So really I don't think the safety issues is the dominant issue. The dominant issues are cost and efficacy in terms of getting your greenhouse gas emissions down.
And Gwen, I know you've researched this extensively. Have you always been in favor of nuclear, or how did you form
No,
this
I
view?
mean, no. I basically got involved in this when I started looking into the climate change issue, and I mean that's the perspective I came at it from. And one of the things that's quite striking is that most of the scientists I talk to, who have no dog in this fight at all, they don't work for nuclear power stations or something, you know, do the same sort of risk evaluation that I do, which is a layman's risk. You know, in fact, you know, compared to other sources of energy, given we're a high-energy society, how much damage is this going to do? And the answer is not all that much. I mean, we've had 3 major nuclear accidents. 3 Mile Island in the United States, nobody died. Chernobyl in what's now Belarus, the old Soviet Union, in which direct casualties under 2 dozen first responders, and a number, you pick a number, any number of people who were subsequently affected, but that may mean they lost 6 weeks of life.
Clearly, you can say clearly 4,000 childhood thyroid cancers at a minimum, and that's an absolute minimum. I suppose maybe the question you're asking is, do we need, given the risks, do we need nuclear? Now, Germany, the strongest industrial state in all of mainland Europe, uses 20% of all EU electricity. Straight after Fukushima, shut half its nuclear plant down. In 9 years' time, will shut the remainder. Now, Germany has an industry. Germany has a high-use industry. Germany does research and development. What is it that we know that the strongest economy in Europe doesn't? And that's an interesting question.
Well, what we know
In other words, do we need nuclear? The answer is no. The next industrial revolution will be renewable.
If you take Germany, I think you do need to look at Germany. And what's happened there is that they have had some good success with renewables, and that's positive. And they've got good solar, which helps provide the electricity during the peak times. But what they're also doing is building more coal. Coal is coming online, and so renewables are tending to push out gas, which is a bad fossil fuel, but it's the least worst option in terms of fossil fuels. What we're finding is that coal is taking the place of nuclear. And it seems such a tragedy to me for a country that does profess to be an environmental leader, that they're making all this progress on renewables and then basically taking 2 steps back by closing down their nuclear power stations with no good reason.
Okay, now,
Paul, go ahead.
Okay, now there is no new coal that wasn't planned before Fukushima happened. So all the coal that's coming online was planned before the nuclear shutdown. Now Germany will have a bit of a coal blip. There's no question about it, but only a bit. But if you look at it in close detail, you will see their GDP will continue to climb and their greenhouse gas will continue to reduce. And that is the truth about the German Energiewende. Don't listen to any other truth. That is the case.
The figures that they've just put out as their targets for renewables in the future are ambitious. It's about 55 to 60% by 2035. But if they're not using nuclear energy for the rest, for that other 40-45%, it means it's going to be fossil fuels. And that's environmentally damaging.
Let's distinguish between electricity and energy. Now, in the UK, this is total energy. Okay? Of that, electricity is 20% of that. Now, in the UK, at its height, nuclear provided us with 20% of that, which means if we go for a huge like-to-like rebuild in the UK, we will be supplying only 4% of our total energy and ameliorating only 4% of our greenhouse gases. Now, this is by the government's own figures. So nuclear is actually quite a small thing when you're thinking about it in
globally?
total. Globally, in terms of China, which is the big issue, okay, nuclear compared to the plans for wind and solar is minimal, even if they're going to go for a big one.
So let me put this to you, and then Gwyn will bring you in. Even if nuclear energy and the production of that energy becomes 99.999% completely safe and secure, and maybe we can be more resilient against the earthquakes and the resulting tsunami, for instance, that destroyed Fukushima, would you still be against it?
If it's safe. What's the problem? I mean, but as has been alluded to, it's not simply the...
So it is a risk assessment for you then, based on the positives?
Well, it is a risk assessment, but when you talk about the money, you can start to throw away, you know, you're throwing away pound notes. Now, the UK already owes itself about 100 billion in terms of its own current waste legacy. And if Hinkley Point 3 ever comes online, say in the mid-2020s, we will be, the UK taxpayer and consumer will be putting, everybody estimates, £1 billion per year into the deep pockets of the French and the Chinese investors.
So, Gwyn, an economic issue?
Oh, well, it is an economic. I mean, I don't take the safety thing terribly seriously, honestly. I mean, the numbers just are, I mean, yes, of course, I mean, people don't like to talk about this, but when you design a road, you design it to kill this many people or that many people with a shallower curve per year. You know, these calculations are made all the time, and we make them about energy generation as well. The cost issue is actually very serious because nuclear is expensive. It's not only expensive, it's always subsidized. There has never been a nuclear plant built which bought insurance privately. It's always covered by government. I mean, you know, against accidents, including Hinkley.
Absolutely.
So, you know, there is a very major cost issue because if you didn't spend it on nuclear, you might have spent it on wind power, solar power, what have you.
Precisely.
And on that ground, I wouldn't embark on a worldwide, global, sort of crash program of building more nuclear. But shutting down the nuclear you've got in some panic-stricken reaction to Fukushima, I mean, Japan has shut all of its nuclear down. Their target for cutting greenhouse gas emissions by 2020 was a 25% reduction. They just came out 2 weeks ago and said, sorry, no, we've shut the nuclear down. We're only going to reduce it by 3%. By 2020. That's the cost of prematurely shutting nuclear down. In the long run, you'd have to prove to me that nuclear was, you know, let's see you build the nuclear plants without subsidies and pay for your own insurance. Then I'll be impressed.
So, Jonathan, would you live next to a nuclear power plant?
Oh, yes.
Given the inherent risk.
So would
I'd be much happier living next to a nuclear plant than a coal plant or a gas plant because of the impacts they can have. But I think when we're looking at climate change and addressing it, I don't believe the story that it's either renewables or nuclear. I think it's got to be both because 70% of the electricity generated today in the world is from fossils, and getting rid of that is such a challenge that it's basically can both manage to do it. That's going to be a stretch, let alone not. And if you look at the countries which are achieving low carbon electricity, France, Sweden, or if you're looking to North America and the state of Ontario, those countries are doing it with a good proportion of nuclear, often with a good proportion of renewables. And they're the ones that are doing it now, doing it practically, and we need practical solutions now to address climate change.
A wonderful term, NIMBY, worked its way into our lexicon, but based on not in my backyard. I think we've got to thank you Americans for that. So there are NIMBYs on both sides of the argument here. There are those that obviously wouldn't want to be anywhere near a nuclear power plant, but on the other side, as far as the renewables are concerned, there are some that say, no, wind farms ugly.
Potentially, but in terms of wind farms, you're largely talking about offshore as the major generators. But let's be clear about this.
Such as the farm that has been recently closed down.
Well, no, not closed down.
£4 billion project, I believe.
Not commissioned because of sort of government problems. But you know, the way that the money is organised. But let's be clear about this. The Citibank, for example, published a recent report stating very clearly that by 2025, 70% of all new power generation investment will be renewable. 70%. So the question is, why are we clinging on to what is essentially a failed, expensive and potentially dangerous technology when the next industrial revolution will be renewable?
Overcome some big obstacles there. And for instance, in China, where they've invested so heavily in renewables, they're able to do that because the way the state is run, the amount of control they have. And, you know, they might be able to get away with a bit more
But you also talk
displacement
about grid connections. In other words, if you have a large grid connection, you can throw power over long distances to make up for questions about intermittency. And when you're thinking about intermittency, the last thing that you want, in other words, when the wind doesn't blow, the sun doesn't shine, the last thing that you want is this nuclear power station that has to run all of the time. You can't power it up and power it down. It just runs.
Actually, that's not true. In Germany, they've actually got designs of reactors that now are reducing their demand during the peak of the day to match the solar output that's happening there. So it's certainly the case that for the best economics, you're best running them constantly, but they do have this ability to vary their output.
I'm not entirely sure that's absolutely. I think that.
I am entirely sure.
I think that's a marginal. No, I think that's a marginal. No, I don't think that's actually right. I think that in terms of the power station will actually be running. It won't be switched off. You won't. So you're not going to switch off.
They're able to control their output in order to work together with renewables to get address this whole issue of varying supply.
Even if that isn't the case, that's where the technology is going, presumably.
Yes, the newer designs have more flexibility than the ones already, and you can look to ways of having energy storage, perhaps having hydrogen cogeneration for transport to get renewables which are intermittent and nuclear which are best running at the constant rate, in a way that we can phase out more and more fossils. So there are technological advances taking place throughout the whole energy system which will allow this to take place. And I really want to go for both, because with this focus of this exhibition on climate change, the problem is you have a single debate on a single energy technology, and you don't consider that we need large amounts of energy throughout the world, and we've got to do it choosing the best options that we have.
The problem is nuclear will eat all the pies. Nuclear is so incredibly expensive that if you invest in this, what is essentially this old technology, you may not have the resources to do new science, to do new work, to do the real work which is about renewable energy. And that is the key here. Nuclear is hugely, hugely expensive.
I would say I kind of agree with Paul in the sense I don't want to see us shut. Existing plants are sunk costs. Sure. Why would you prematurely shut them down? They're not that dangerous. But do we want
You're saying they have to coexist with the other sources?
Yeah, for the moment, and if you came up with cheap nuclear plants, then I would be interested in another generation, but you haven't yet. So, let's keep what we've got and gradually phase them out, but bring along the renewables at least as fast as that, so you don't get a large spike in emissions because you close them all down prematurely on inadequate grounds.
I have to pick up on the cost point. It takes a lot of money to invest in new power stations of any type, and there does need to be a lot of investment now because we've got a lot of old stations, including the old coal stations mentioned in the video that preceded this. But in terms of overall cost, looking at the long term, nuclear is a good option in terms of costs for low carbon generation.
Let's finish this debate. Final question. How would you cope in minus 30 degrees trekking through Antarctica?
I wouldn't. It's incredibly full of admiration for these young people to do that. I'm absolutely full of admiration, and good luck to them, I say.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Don't envy him in his efforts, but good luck, and I hope the science he gets out is excellent too.
Green, this could be the next gig for you.
Well,
think of the material as a journalist.
I grew up.
Your experiences on Antarctica.
I grew up in Canada. That's why I live here.
How cold did it get?
Actually, it does get to minus 30 occasionally.
Really?
Yes.
Well, it's like it's 8 degrees out there, and that's a little chilly for me. Gents, thanks very much indeed.
But it's a dry cold.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, gentlemen.
So we've got time for. Remember, keep your tweets coming in at Willis South Pole. Just messages of support for Parker and the team, or even any questions that you want us to put to them, when hopefully we'll be speaking to them on a daily basis via the satellite phone. Yep. Thanks, Colleen.
Thank you.
It's been enjoyable.
It has
it's nice.
been. Thanks
and you're
going
to be with us for the next
You've got me for
couple
2 weeks. You're not getting rid of me.
Yes. Brilliant. Tomorrow's show will be asking about the message, the climate change, and whether it's getting lost in translation.
And we have a taste of the kind of specialized expedition food that Parker and his team are enjoying.
That's for you
and
to sample.
Let's hope they're enjoying.
I'm sure they are.
We'll have breakfast.
Yeah. And we'll see you tomorrow for more of this Willis Resilience Expedition news. And remember the website, willisresilience.com. We'll see you in the morning.
Thank you.